There are moments in gardening when history comes back to life in the soil. During World War II, when global trade was disrupted and fertilizers were scarce, ordinary families had to dig deep into resourcefulness. They couldn't run to the store for peat moss or bagged compost. Instead, they turned to clever, low-cost methods that kept their victory gardens alive through entire growing seasons. One of those methods was a mulch trick so simple yet so effective that it kept beds fertile without constant feeding. And when it was tested again in today's gardens, the results were remarkable: healthier soil, fewer weeds, and crops that thrived long after the mulch was laid down. If you've ever felt the frustration of soil drying out too quickly, weeds overtaking your beds, or nutrients running low just when your plants need them most, stay with this. In the next few minutes, you'll discover how a forgotten mulch method from World War II can be recreated in your own garden using materials you likely already have. Not only does it work, but it feeds the soil for months on end, requiring little effort beyond the first step. During the 1940s, fertilizers and chemicals were being directed toward the war effort. Civilians at home were told to plant victory gardens to supply their families with food, but they had to rely on local natural resources to keep those gardens producing. Mulch became a lifeline. Farmers and families learned that by covering the soil with organic waste materials, they could trap moisture, smother weeds, and, most importantly, feed the ground as the mulch broke down. Unlike today, where gardeners often refresh mulch every few weeks or months, they looked for ways to make a single application last the entire season. This is where the forgotten trick comes in. They didn't just spread loose straw, hay, or leaves on top. They layered organic matter in a way that created a slow-release feast for the soil. Think of it as building a blanket made of carbon and nitrogen materials, set directly over the garden bed, that fed microbes and worms steadily from spring until harvest. The trick was deceptively simple. Families would collect whatever was on hand: newspapers, cardboard, straw, grass clippings, and kitchen scraps. The key was to layer them in a sequence that resisted quick breakdown on the surface while slowly composting underneath. The first layer was paper or cardboard laid flat on the soil to block weeds and hold in moisture. Over that, a layer of straw or shredded leaves was added to insulate. Finally, fresh green waste, like grass clippings or garden trimmings, was scattered on top. What made this method different from modern mulching was that the paper base slowed down decomposition, keeping the mulch intact longer, while the mix of carbon-rich straw and nitrogen-rich greens fueled microbial life underneath. Worms moved in to eat the softened cardboard and kitchen scraps tucked between layers, leaving castings right at root depth. The result was a mulch system that lasted the whole season, slowly collapsing into rich humus by the time crops were harvested. When gardeners tried this again in raised beds today, the transformation was clear. At first, the mulch seemed like a protective blanket. The soil stayed cool even during hot days, and weeds struggled to push through. After about 3 weeks, worms began tunneling upward into the paper layer, pulling softened fibers down. By the second month, the straw and greens had collapsed into a damp, dark mat alive with fungal threads and tiny decomposers. Unlike thin mulch that dries out or blows away, this layered mulch grew denser over time, becoming a living crust that locked in soil fertility. By the end of the season, when the mulch was pulled back, the soil underneath had changed dramatically. It was darker, looser, and filled with worm castings. Crops planted directly into these beds had stronger roots and needed less watering than those in uncovered soil. In essence, this one-time mulch feeding had carried the garden through an entire growing season. Modern gardeners often make the mistake of using mulch only as a top cover. They spread straw or bark chips in a thin layer and hope it will do the job. The World War II method worked differently because it combined both a barrier and a food source. The cardboard or newspaper base acted as a slow biodegrading weed block, while the straw and greens above created a steady compost system in place. It was sustainable because it relied on waste materials people had access to, not store-bought inputs. For us today, it's a reminder that some of the best soil-building methods require nothing more than recycling what would otherwise be discarded. To recreate this, start with your bed cleared of weeds or loosened soil. Lay down a sheet of plain cardboard or several sheets of newspaper, ensuring the edges overlap so no light gets through. Wet it thoroughly so it molds into the soil surface. Then add a thick layer of straw, shredded leaves, or any dry carbon-rich material. On top of this, scatter green material such as grass clippings, vegetable peels, or even pulled weeds without seeds. Water the whole layer again to lock it down and activate decomposition. The mulch will look bulky at first, but over time it will settle and knit together. Insects, worms, and fungi will colonize the layers, steadily breaking them down into humus. The key is not disturbing it. Unlike compost piles that require turning, this mulch works because it remains in place, feeding the soil directly beneath where your crops grow. After 1 month, you'll notice the soil beneath remains cool and moist, even when surrounding areas dry out. By the mid-season, your plants will often show stronger growth, thanks to the steady release of nutrients from the decomposing mulch. By the end of the season, much of the straw and greens will be gone, and the cardboard will be soft and partially eaten by worms. At this stage, you can simply add a new layer on top for the next season, building soil year after year. What's remarkable is how this trick mirrors the natural forest floor, where fallen leaves and plant matter layer and decompose without human intervention. The World War II gardeners didn't just stumble onto something convenient, they essentially mimicked nature's own blueprint for long-term soil health. In an age of packaged mulch, store-bought compost, and chemical fertilizers, it's easy to forget that resilience comes from simplicity. Gardeners in World War II didn't have a choice. They had to make do with what was around them. And in doing so, they uncovered a technique that still outperforms many modern methods. For today's gardener, this is more than nostalgia. It's a practical path toward fertility that doesn't drain the wallet or the planet. Trying this World War II mulch trick today is a way of connecting with gardeners of the past, people who grew food under hardship, but left behind knowledge we can still use. It's proof that gardening wisdom isn't always about new inventions, but sometimes about remembering what worked before. If it fed families through a global crisis, it can certainly keep your garden thriving through a hot summer or a dry season. The lesson here is simple. Don't underestimate the power of layered organic waste. By building this forgotten World War II mulch blanket, you not only save yourself from constant watering and feeding, but also create soil that comes alive on its own. Bigger worms, darker earth, stronger plants. These are the rewards of trusting in an old method that never stopped working, only stopped being remembered. If this guide on the forgotten World War II mulch trick inspired you, make sure to subscribe to Hydro Haven for more deep dives into soil revival and time-tested gardening methods. Share this with a fellow gardener who's tired of quick fixes and ready to build fertility that lasts an entire season. Because sometimes, the best solutions are the ones buried in history, waiting for us to use them again.